Hey photographer, Jessica Whitaker here. In this video, I'm going to help answer the question, what lens should you buy first? In this video, in all my videos on YouTube, I teach to beginner photographers in a very simple, easy to understand way that is from a practical perspective that keeps your budget in mind. My goal is by the end of the video, you are going to have 3 fantastic options that you will feel empowered to choose from rather than left feeling even more confused. There's an incredible resource that I also want to point you to when it comes to actually purchasing the lens, whether that's now or later down the road. It's called KEH Camera. It's the best place to buy used camera equipment. They're kindly sponsoring this free photography video, and I will have a coupon code as well as all of the lens suggestions that I mentioned today. Check out the description box of this video. First, we need to have a basic understanding of how lenses work. So number 1 is called focal length. The focal length determines the field of view and the magnification of the subject. It's also what the lenses are titled after. So you're going to hear me talk about a 50mm. You might have heard about a 35mm. A 35mm has a wider field of view than something like a 50mm. Number 2 is the depth of field, and the depth of field is determined by the focal length of the lens. A longer focal length, like a 135mm, tends to have a shallower depth of field. This means that the subject remains in sharp focus while the background is more blurred, which creates a more pronounced separation between the subject and its surroundings. Remember when I mentioned 35mm? Well, something like a 35mm is not going to have as shallow depth of field compared to a 135mm lens. Depth of field and focal length work together to create different effects. Number 3 to keep in mind is the actual working distance. This is the distance between you and the subject. Hang on to that thought. Number 4 is all about perspective and compression. For example, a 135mm lens tends to compress the elements in the frame. So here on the screen, I want you to take a look at the ground and the difference between the ground in both shots. This is a great example how it flattens the subject's features and it kind of minimizes the distortion. And this can be quite flattering when it comes to portrait photography, but in contrast, the other photo, the 85mm lens, captures a more natural perspective, often considered to be closer to how our own human vision perceives the subject. Now we have to ask ourselves 3 questions. Number 1, what is your budget? Number 2, what do you primarily photograph? And number 3, what type of environment do you shoot in? We're going to go back to that working distance factor. Are you typically photographing indoors in coffee shops or clients' homes, or do you find yourself mostly outdoors in the forest or a big field with lots of room? When it comes to your budget for your lens, opting to buy used over new equipment on KEH is a great way to save hundreds of dollars on very gently used items. Don't be tempted by social media marketplaces or third-party auction sites. You have no idea of knowing if they are being honest about what they are selling you. Whereas on KEH, they thoroughly quality inspect every piece of equipment that comes through their warehouse. After the gear has been thoroughly inspected and tested, it is transparently rated on their website using their quality tier system. You're going to see excellent plus, which basically means like new, all the way down to bargain, which is where you're going to have some cosmetic scratches on the outside of the lens or the camera, but it's not going to affect the actual picture quality. It's just regular wear and tear. I personally like to shop on bargain because sometimes I can save upwards of $300 versus purchasing an excellent plus or even like new. There's a big misconception about buying used equipment. When it comes to KEH, most of the items that people are selling are simply collecting dust on a shelf somewhere or taking up space in their camera bag. Maybe they're looking to change systems or upgrade from a DSLR to mirrorless. It doesn't mean that the items are damaged. It just means that it's better on the environment and on your wallet. And maybe you're going to be able to sell your kit lens for a little extra cash to put towards your new purchase. KEH Camera will be linked down in the description box below, as well as a coupon code and a selling bonus. Now let's get into the actual lenses that I suggest you buy for your first lens. My first suggestion is going to apply to most photographers, and that is a 50mm lens. This focal length is ideal for basic portrait photography. It is also a great focal length when it comes to the working distance. You don't have to have a ton of room between the subject and the camera. In most circumstances, you can use it indoors. It's going to be a little bit tight, but you can still get the shot. It's also wide enough to place two people in the frame without compromising on leaving a lot of the background out. This lens also has a few different price points, making it very accessible as a first lens. There's a 50mm 1.8, which is about $125 new, 50mm 1.4, and then the most expensive is a 50mm 1.2. If you can swing it, I would suggest to go for that middle tier, the 50mm 1.4, because it's a lens that will be able to grow with you and with your photography business. And it's especially great if you are going to be shooting in a lot of low light situations. The second lens that I'll suggest to you is my most controversial opinion, but it's one that I find suggesting to my own friends who are looking to get into photography, and that is an 85mm. This is not going to work for everyone. It is not a blanket statement, but it is for people who are looking to achieve a very specific look with their images. If you want your subject to appear very isolated from a super blurry background, this lens is for you. This is where working distance is extremely important. If you're a photographer who is mostly going to do all of your work outside in the forest, at the beach, in a big field, this lens will be no issue for you to work with. Because of that limited working room that you have between you and your subject, you're going to have to be very far away from them to get a full body portrait or to incorporate more of the environment in the background. This is not going to be ideal for shooting in a coffee shop or in a studio if you just want one lens that can work in all different situations. It's for a very specific type of photographer, but it can achieve a very gorgeous effect. My last lens that I'm going to suggest is going to be great for people who want their camera for their own personal documentation. Maybe you're going to go on a trip and you want to bring your professional camera with you to get some gorgeous images, but you only want to bring one lens. I would suggest a 35mm. This is the widest focal length out of the three, which makes it ideal for when you just want to whip out your camera and take some photos when you're on the street, you're on a bus tour, your kids are playing in the living room. You want to have a lot of the background and the environment in the shot, and you don't want to have to move too much to get a great image. This lens is fantastic, but you do want to be more mindful when taking portraits with it or full body photos, because it can tend to distort the subject much more than a 50 or 85, because it's technically not a portrait lens, though a lot of professional photographers, both wedding and portraits, love using this lens in their work, and I have lots of videos on how to shoot on a 35mm lens. Photographer, let's go back to those three questions. What's your budget? What do you primarily photograph? And where do you typically shoot? If you're still feeling a little bit stuck on which lens would be best for you, ask away in my free Facebook group. It's called Build and Bloom. It's kind, encouraging, and inclusive, and it's the best place to ask these specific questions about your photography business. So whether if you want more insight in which lens is going to be best for you, or you need help drafting a response to a very difficult client situation, Build and Bloom is free to join. Just check it out on Facebook groups. I've also launched season 2 of the Build and Bloom Photography podcast, available for you to listen and learn wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to check out KEH down in the description box below. I'll also have my lenses that I talked about and those coupon codes for you in the description box. Be sure to hit subscribe so you're the first to know when new free videos for your photography business come out. And I will see you in my next video. Click right here to watch and to learn. I'll see you there.